everyone, it's Andrea Tully from AndreaTully.com, and I am so excited about this interview today. You guys, I have been getting so many questions for years now from pre-meds, people in medical school wondering, how do I pay for medical school? How do I deal with the student loans? What kind of financial advice do I need, and what do I need to be thinking about in terms of my finances? Because paying for medical school and being pre-med is really financially taxing for sure. And so today I have Dr. Jim Dahle, who is the White Coat Investor. He has this incredible blog. If you haven't checked it out yet, you absolutely must. It's thewhitecoatinvestor.com, and I will link to it below. But Dr. Dahle is going to be here with us today to give us all kinds of information about finances and everything you need to know in terms of being a pre-med. So I hope you enjoy. Don't forget to check out my blog, AndreaTully.com. Subscribe to this channel so that you never miss a video. Find me on Instagram at A Doctor in the House, Twitter, and I will talk to you guys soon. Bye. Overwhelmingly, one of the questions I get the most is kind of how do I pay for medical school and things like that. And so basically I think people would love to hear your advice and your tips on like financial things you should be aware of as a pre-med, like high school and college, and then how to manage your finances in medical school. And then tips for residents and stuff too, I think would be amazing.
Well, I don't think that'll be a problem at all. I've got a lot of ideas, actually. I can see why people are worried about that because I was worried about that. When I was an undergraduate, I was pretty poor. Now, I can remember donating plasma as an undergraduate because I needed to eat something, you know. And so I can really relate to people wondering when they look at these kinds of tuition bills and debt burdens that medical students are coming out with now. Yeah. You know, when all you've made in your entire life is $10,000 or $20,000, and now you're thinking of being in debt for $300,000, it just seems totally overwhelming. Right. But I think the place to start is with your undergraduate costs. Okay. Because the thing is, if you come out of undergraduate education, you're already $150,000 in debt. Yep. You know, by the time you're out of medical school, it's going to be $300,000, $400,000, $500,000, and that's going to affect your specialty choice. Mm-hmm. You're not going to be able to do something that maybe you're going to turn out to love in medical school because you owe too much money. You literally won't be able to afford it. Yeah. So I think the first thing to do is to limit how much debt you go into as an undergraduate. Okay. Unlike medical school, where almost every medical school is really expensive, there is a huge variation in the cost of an undergraduate education. For example, the state schools in my state, the tuition ranges from about $6,000 to $8,000 per year, which I know that's cheaper than most states. Yeah. But the point is, you can cash flow it. You can earn that in the summers and during school, and just a little bit of help from your parents, and come out with no debt at all. Mm-hmm. So that's what I recommend: is that undergraduates come out with no debt, if possible, or at least very little. Okay. The problem is there's a lot of undergraduate schools that cost $30,000 or $40,000 a year that people don't have any resources whatsoever going into undergraduate school, and they go to these schools expecting a financial aid package, and the financial aid package is all loans. Right. And that's just not, you know, you're just starting out so far behind, not only because you're already in a big hole, but because you're used to just borrowing like crazy, and it all feels like monopoly money. You know, so you just start tacking it on when you get to medical school. And then I get these emails when you hit residency saying, hey, I owe $475,000. What should I do? And at this point, the horse is out of the barn. You know, there's only so much you can do. So that's number one that you can do as a pre-med, is limit your undergraduate costs. Okay. Now, is it worth, you know, $40,000 a year to go to Harvard? Well, maybe it is. But there are so many schools out there that are $40,000 and aren't Harvard. Yes. Really aren't any better than your state school. Yeah. So I would take a very careful look at your state school. Now, it's one thing if your parents have saved up $100,000 for you to go to undergraduate, but if they haven't, like most of us, take a real serious look when you look at your colleges and try to minimize the cost there. And then once you get there, of course, the cost of living, have roommates. You know, if you can get by with a bike, you know, just ride a bike. Shoot, I didn't own a car until my senior year of college. And even then, it was a $3,000 car, you know, like a super nice car. But I was able to come out with basically no debt out of undergraduate.
Right.
So that's number one.
Okay.
Number two is choosing your medical school.
Okay.
You know, our medical schools are some better than others. Yes, they probably are. Are they 3 times as good? No. There's no medical school in this country that's 3 times better than any other medical school in the country. Mm-hmm. So you ought to be careful not to pay 3 times as much for a medical school if you can possibly get into a less expensive one. Right? It's amazing how much you can pay. I think there's a school that's now over $80,000 a year in tuition. I mean,
$80,000 a year?
$80,000 a year. When I started the University of Utah, for residents, it was less than $10,000 a year. Now, granted, it's been 15 years, and you can't do that at Utah anymore, but it's only $32,000. But there's a huge difference between $32,000 and $80,000.
Yes. So
if you get into both of those schools, please, 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 choose the one that's $32,000 a year.
Right.
Now, more and more I'm seeing those who are really the top-notch applicants are picking the less expensive school because the educations aren't that much different.
Right.
And the cost is dramatically different.
Yeah, that's one question I get all the time. People want to know, is there a big difference in the undergrad that you go to in terms of where you end up in medical school? And in general, I say no. I don't think there is, unless it's Harvard or something where you're going to make amazing connections. But otherwise, if it's just a normal undergrad, the prestige, I don't really think makes a huge difference.
Now, I've sat on an admissions committee at medical school. Okay. So I saw exactly how much of a difference it made. And yes, when somebody came across and they'd gone to Harvard or Yale or Princeton, it was a little more impressive, mostly because most of our applicants came from the state schools in our state and the private schools in our state, and it seemed exotic. It seemed like they were, something special. And so don't get me wrong, for 10 or 15 schools in this country, it probably does help you a little bit.
Right.
But it's not 50 schools, and there's plenty of schools that are charging $40,000 a year that, might sound like a really impressive school, but really aren't impressing anybody on the admissions committee because those guys also went to the state school.
Sure. Okay, that's good to hear. That's really good.
Keep in mind there probably are some benefits if you're going into, you want to be an investment banker on Wall Street, or if you want to go into politics. I think where you go to school matters a lot more than if you go into medicine.
Oh, okay.
Whereas when you come out of your medical training, people are going to go, oh, what residency did you go to? Right. I just interviewed somebody yesterday. I don't even know what undergraduate they went to.
Yeah,
I don't even know what medical they went to. All I care is what residency they just came out of. And so as long as it's adequate to get to the next step, I don't think you ought to kill yourself in trying to get to the very most competitive school you can.
Okay. And does the same go for residency? Because I get the same question, does it matter what medical school I go to in terms of residency? And I always say, the very top medical schools could prepare you more or set you up for a more prestigious residency. But overall, it's more your grades and your board scores and your research and who you know.
Exactly. I mean, just ask someone who's been on a residency selection committee. What do they look at? Well, there's probably a minimum board score.
Right.
If it's competitive residency and your board scores are terrible, well, you're probably not going to get in.
Right.
And they look at, how you did in your rotations in that specialty. That's number 2. And then your letters from people in that specialty. But the school has got to be the 10th factor at most.
Right.
It's just not that important.
Yeah.
And so I would encourage you to put money much farther up that list as far as what school you choose to attend. Now, if you only get into one, like a lot of applicants, you're out of luck.
Right.
But if you get into 5, shoot, pick the cheapest.
Okay, that's great advice.
And oftentimes the cheapest one is one of the better schools anyway.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the most expensive ones tend to be the newer schools, sometimes the DO schools that don't, they don't look quite as good on paper when you come to the match.
Right. That is great advice. Thank you. Okay, and we just kind of dove into everything too, and I wanted to back up for a second if you don't mind. Do you think you could just kind of give us a little overview about who you are? I gave a little plug for your website, but how'd you get started in all this? Like, you're an emergency medicine physician, but what's your kind of background and how'd you get into all of this?
Well, that's right. Professionally, by training, I'm an emergency physician. In undergraduate, I studied science. I had zero interest in business whatsoever. I've always been a little bit interested in personal finance, but not dramatically, certainly not as an undergraduate, certainly not in medical school. It wasn't until I got to residency earned my first few paychecks that I really started being interested in making money and what you do with money once you make it. Amazing how your first paycheck does that. And it turned out my first few interactions with financial professionals didn't go so well. I got ripped off by a financial planner. I got ripped off by an insurance agent who happened to be one of my best friends. I got ripped off by a lender. I got ripped off by a realtor. I got ripped off by a recruiter. And at a certain point, I just said, if I don't do something about this, this is just going to continue throughout my career and my life.
Sure.
And so I decided, well, I'm going to self-educate a little bit. My house was next to a used bookstore in residency. And so I'd walk over there and I'd look through the financial racks. You know, they'd have a few racks of books. And I'd buy books at $2 or $3 a piece, and I'd read them. And after 20 books or so, I realized this stuff isn't that complicated. You know, I read a lot of bad books, but I also read a few good books and realized, hey, you know, there's not that much to this. And then I started looking around and realizing there's no other doctors that know this stuff.
Yep.
And so I just started being the resources for other doctors around me, and I was helping other people online. And then finally in 2011, I decided, well, instead of just typing the same thing over and over again into internet forums, I'm going to start my own website. And then I can just paste a link in and they can go read what I wrote. I only have to write it once. And that is how the White Coat Investor was born. Now, I kind of had an entrepreneurial idea with it from the very beginning. So it was a for-profit website from the very beginning. I threw some ads up there, you know, in the first week. But it didn't make much money for a couple of years. Now it's been quite a financial success as well, which I'm obviously happy about.
Yeah.
But mostly the goal of it is to just help those who are willing to go into fields like medicine get a fair shake on Wall Street. So they can have this knowledge. It took me years of self-study to pick up of how the financial world really works and get it right at the beginning of their career when it's most useful. So that's the whole point of it. Then in 2014, I wrote a book called The White Coat Investor, A Doctor's Guide to Personal Finance and Investing. Basically, I'd been encouraged by blog readers to write a book. And I said, I'll get to it. I should have done that 2 years earlier because it just sold like crazy. It still sells like crazy. It's by far and away, it's the most frequently purchased book in that niche. And there's probably 20 or 30 books that are about physician finances. Just because it's one of the few that's written by docs and it's got the information that you really want and need.
Right.
And so you can get that at Amazon. It's available also at Barnes & Noble. You can buy it for your iPad. It's, you know, available for your Kindle.
Yeah.
But highly recommended. I've got a few chapters in there for pre-meds and medical students as well.
Yep.
Although, you know, half the book isn't going to apply to you. That's okay. It will eventually. And it's good to get the knowledge earlier rather than later. Exactly.
I think it's good to know what you need to be thinking about in the future because I was reading this stuff in college and medical school and it's like, well, I have no income, I have no money, but I need to know what I need to be thinking about in the future so that I don't, you know, have regrets or realize that I've missed the boat on something. That's always been my fear, that I'm going to miss the boat and 10 years later realize I should have been investing in this 10 years ago. So I think it's really good to start thinking about this stuff early and to know what you need to know. Yeah. And part of the difficult thing is realizing what the big things are. Yes. You know, it's like that display they give you at some point in your life where they take the big rocks, gravel and the sand and the water, right? If you put the water in first or the sand in first into the jar, you're not going to have room for the big rocks. Right. You can figure out what the big rocks are, take care of those at least, then you'll be fine. Yeah. The rest of it on a physician income, you can figure out later. But get the big things right at the beginning. It's pretty important. Okay. So kind of what you said so far is that as a pre-med, pick an inexpensive undergrad, pick an inexpensive medical school, and kind of live frugally. Are those the big rocks? What other things should we be thinking about? I think those are the big rocks. I mean, the truth of the matter is for a physician, the big financial deal is your first year out of residency. Yeah. Okay, so just thinking about some of the other big questions that people ask me a lot. One thing people want to know is about working during medical school, which in general, I always say you can't. Like, you just can't. Do you have any tips for kind of making any money as a medical student? Or sure. I sure do. I worked in medical school. What? No. And I'll tell you why. Now, I didn't work as a third-year medical student. There's no doubt about it. You can't. Because basically, you've got a job. Right. But think about all those months in your fourth year where you were doing these really easy rotations, or you had the time off because you were interviewing,
or you just took the month off anyway, or whatever.
Yeah.
The truth is the second half of your fourth year is not very hard.
True.
You also have the summer between your first year and your second year where you typically have a few months. Now, some people fill that with unpaid research. Other people fill it with paid research.
Right, that's what I did.
Other people work. And so I think it's quite possible to make some money during medical school.
Okay.
At my school, there was an opportunity for fourth-year medical students to do H&Ps at one of the local surgery centers, and they paid us $20 an hour to do it.
Oh, nice.
I thought $20 an hour was a lot of money back then.
Right.
But, I made a few $1,000s. So I think it is possible to work during medical school.
Okay.
But there's no way you're going to earn enough to even pay your living expenses, much less make any kind of significant dent into your tuition payments.
Right.
So either the money's saved up, your parents are helping you, or you're taking out loans like most people are.
Okay.
But, it is possible to work during medical school, but you're just not going to have that much time to do it. Undergraduate, I think you can work your whole way through undergraduate.
Yeah.
Taking 16 credits an hour as an undergraduate is nothing compared to what you're going to be doing as a first-year medical student.
True.
That's probably the equivalent of taking 30 credit hours as an undergraduate.
Yeah.
So I totally believe that people can work a part-time job during college and then bust their butt during the summers and make quite a bit of money.
Yep.
If they're doing research or something like that, there are paid research opportunities out there, even for undergraduates.
Yep. Okay, that's great advice. And then another question I get really all the time, people want to know about going to community college first. I think a lot of people ask because it's such an inexpensive option. If they just can't afford regular college, they want to know about community college. And then lots of people want to do either nursing or some other kind of medical profession so that they can work for a while before medical school. And they think that, doing nursing or something will give them kind of an upper hand in medical school. Have you encountered anybody who does something like that, or what do you think about that?
Well, let's take the first question first about community college.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that the cheapest way to get an undergraduate education is to spend your first 2 years at a community college and then transfer.
Right.
However, I think it's pretty hard to really take the position that your education at a community college is equivalent to what you would get even at your local state school.
Yeah.
It's just not the same education.
Yeah.
Because the kids that are going to community college are not the same kids that are going to the state university.
Right.
So your peer group is not quite as impressive at the community college. It's a lot of people that don't have a lot of direction in life, a lot of people that maybe barely graduated from high school, and so your peer group isn't quite as strong.
Okay.
I wouldn't be necessarily so worried about the reputation of the school and how it appears to a medical school admissions committee as I would about the quality of the education.
Sure.
There's not a huge difference in price between a community college and a local state school that's in state for you. There is some difference, and so I think you have to be a little bit careful there. Just doing it for the money. I think most kids that are on track to go to medical school are qualifying for scholarships at their state schools.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably what you want to be doing, is going to schools that are offering you scholarships or that aren't that expensive to start with, and then working as much as you can to reduce the cost there. I'm not sure for someone who's planning to go to medical school that community college is the best first step.
Okay.
I'm all for decreasing your debt and decreasing your cost, but at a certain point, you gotta consider the quality of the education too. And I think at a community college, you're taking a step down in the quality of your education.
Okay, great. That's good advice.
So I think that one's a little bit, you have to be careful there. Now the other question, remind me again, the other one was about nursing. And
a lot of people want to do nursing first.
Something like that.
Exactly.
The truth of the matter is you're going to spend your whole life doing medical stuff in hospitals. You're going to get a couple of years of experience as a medical student. You're going to get 3 to 5 more years in residency of experience. That's 80 hours a week. You're going to have plenty of medical experience by the time you're done with your training.
Yeah.
You're not going to feel like, if I'd only been a nurse for a couple of years first, then I'd be a really good doctor.
Right.
You'll get enough.
Right.
But what people struggle with in medical school isn't the clinical experience. And when everybody hits third year, we're all clueless.
Right.
Yes, you might look a little bit better if you've spent some time on the ward as a nurse, but it's just not going to give you that much of an advantage.
Right.
And so I wouldn't feel like that's something that you ought to do just because it'll help you get into medical school or because it'll make you a better doctor. If it's something you're interested in, if what you want to study as an undergraduate is nursing, then study nursing. But I don't know that that's necessarily better than history if what you want to study is history
Sure.
or business or science. So I would study what you want to study. If what you're interested in is paramedicine, then sure, become a paramedic or an EMT or whatever. It's good to have some medical experience, but I think the amount you actually have to have is pretty darn limited.
Sure.
All I really did is I was on ski patrol, just minimally, and then I shadowed. I don't even think it was a doc. I think it was a PA and helped translate for him.
Cool.
And then a couple of afternoons shadowing docs, and that was it for medical experience. And was that enough? That was enough. That was probably the bare minimum.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't feel like you need to, get a nursing degree and work for 5 years as a nurse in order to get into medical school or in order to be a good doc.
Right.
Because medical school will train you how to do that. The thing that people struggle with in medical school is the academics.
Yeah.
And so what you really need to do is make sure your academics are strong, not only because that's what people look at very carefully when you're getting into medical school, but also because that's what's going to help you get through medical school.
Right.
There is a lot to learn. And and that's probably the hardest part of medical school.
Yeah.
Not learning how to take care of people on the wards, because when you get to the wards, they assume you know nothing anyway.
Right, exactly, and we don't. And I think a lot of people maybe have a fear that they're not quite there academically, and so they think, well, if I do nursing, then at least I have a career to fall back on, versus if I major in biology or something, what am I going to do with that if I don't if I don't get into medical school? And
I think that's a very realistic fear.
Yeah.
2/3 of people that say they're pre-med and are applying to medical school don't get in anywhere.
Right.
And so I think a backup plan is absolutely critical. And if your backup plan is being a nurse, I think that's a fine backup plan. There's nothing wrong with nursing. It's a great career. A lot of nurses make over $100,000 a year. It's in demand. You can go anywhere you want. If you get sick of the field you're in, you can quickly retrain and go to another field. Yeah. Nursing is not a bad thing to do. It's a great backup plan if and even so, if you decide later on you want to move into an advanced practice practitioner kind of position, you want to go be a CRNA or you want to be a nurse practitioner, you're already halfway there. And so I think it's great from that perspective. But as far as feeling like you need to get that clinical experience before medical school, I don't think that's necessary.
Okay, good. That's great. It's great to hear you say that too, because I never really know, and I get that question a lot. So that's wonderful. Okay. So
I think it's very much a concern of not getting into medical school,
right.
because of all the steps in the medical training pipeline, that's the most difficult one as far as competitiveness goes.
Is getting in.
Unless you're trying to go into dermatology or something, it's just, residency selection isn't that competitive. And even finding a job afterward isn't nearly as competitive as getting into medical school in the first place.
Right. Once you're in, you're pretty much set. There's, most people finish medical school and end up practicing as a physician. So I think you're totally right.
And for the most part, the medical schools will bend over backwards to get you
help
through.
You. Yeah.
Unless you've got a toxic personality or you're really struggling academically, you're going to get through if you can get in. The admissions committees are very good at only selecting people that are going to get through medical school.
Okay. That's great. Okay, and then so that. I feel like that is going to help so many people kind of in high school and in college who want to know what they need to be doing financially.